In February of 2010, Alvin Robertson sat down to eat after what should have been one of the best business meetings of his life. He and former NBA All-Star Ricky Pierce had just visited Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. They had presented a basketball training product built around an instructional video, a youth clinic, and two recognizable names from the game. According to later reporting by the San Antonio Express-News, the meeting had opened the door to a potential seven-figure deal. For Robertson, whose playing career had been over for years and whose contracting work had given him a foothold outside sports, this was more than a product launch. It looked like a way back into the part of his identity that still made sense. Then a television inside the restaurant cut to a breaking report. Robertson's name was on the screen. Police were investigating allegations involving the kidnapping and sexual exploitation of a minor. Pierce looked across the table and asked the question that would soon follow Robertson everywhere. Was it true? Robertson said it was not. He called Walmart to warn the company, but the person on the other end had already seen the report. A business aimed at children and families could not move forward while an accusation like that hung over one of its public faces. In the space between a successful meeting and the end of a meal, the deal began to disappear. There had been no trial. No evidence had been tested in front of a jury. But the first verdict had already arrived in the practical world, where companies protect their names, strangers react to headlines, and an accusation can travel faster than any answer to it. For many people, Robertson's past made that verdict easy to accept. He was not entering the case with an untouched reputation. His adult life already included a domestic assault case, a felony burglary conviction, a no-contest plea in another proceeding, time in custody, and years of legal trouble. He had caused real harm and had been punished for conduct that could not be explained away by a basketball highlight. But a damaged reputation is not proof of a new charge. That distinction would become the center of a case that lasted almost 6 years. It would cost Robertson work, freedom of movement, family moments, and whatever remained of his public name. It would also force an uncomfortable question. What happens when a person who has been guilty before insists that this time he is not? The question carried extra weight because Alvin Robertson had built his first reputation by taking things away. On February 18, 1986, he took the basketball from the Phoenix Suns 10 times. He finished that game with 20 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists, and 10 steals. It was a quadruple-double, one of the rarest statistical achievements in NBA history, and no other guard has ever produced one like it. That season, he recorded more steals than anyone before or since, became Defensive Player of the Year, won the league's first Most Improved Player award, and made the All-Star team. Long before a television report threatened to reduce his identity to one accusation, his hands had written his name into the record book. Understanding how that name became so difficult to judge requires moving backward. The story begins in an Ohio factory town, years before the restaurant television and the vanished deal. Alvin Cyril Robertson was born on July 22, 1962, in Barberton, Ohio, an industrial town southwest of Akron. His route to national basketball did not begin at a celebrated high school program or with the attention later attached to the stars of the 1984 draft. His brother Ken later played college basketball at Cleveland State, so Alvin grew up in a family already familiar with the demands of the game. What distinguished him was not a polished jump shot or a spectacular dunk package. It was his defense, especially the moment when an apparently protected dribble or routine pass became available to him. Robertson learned to read the clues that ball handlers exposed: the angle of a shoulder, a glance toward the intended receiver, the bounce that traveled a little too far from the body. Most defenders responded after the decision. Robertson often seemed to move while it was still being made. His route into major college basketball was not direct. Robertson began at Crowder College, a junior college, during the 1980-81 season. Junior college offered no guarantee of a national stage. It gave him a place to prove that his energy and instincts could survive beyond his hometown, and that a player known first for defense could still command attention. From Crowder, he moved to the University of Arkansas, playing there from 1981 through 1984. The competition became stronger, the possessions faster, and the mistakes more expensive. Robertson's game sharpened with the pressure. He crowded ball handlers, invaded passing lanes, and converted hesitation into transition offense. His steals were not isolated tricks. They changed the emotional temperature of a game. Guards began thinking about his hands before they could think about their own offense. That style demanded judgment. A defender who reaches at the wrong moment opens a path to the basket. A defender who chases every steal can collect impressive numbers while damaging the structure behind him. Robertson's gift was the belief that the ball was exposed, combined with the speed to make that belief true, often enough that coaches accepted the risk. One of the coaches who noticed was Bob Knight. In the summer of 1984, 8 years before NBA professionals transformed Olympic basketball, the United States assembled a roster of college stars. Knight was brilliant, volatile, exacting, and famously difficult to satisfy. The pool included young men who would soon become central figures in the NBA, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, and Sam Perkins among them. Alvin Robertson made the team. He was not selected because the offense needed to be built around him. On a roster filled with future stars, his value came from possessions that never became shots. He pressured the point of attack, created loose balls, and gave talented teammates extra opportunities without demanding control of the ball. Under a coach who treated defensive discipline as a test of character, Robertson's aggression became useful rather than ornamental. The United States won the gold medal in Los Angeles. Robertson left the Olympic floor with proof that his particular skill could function under the greatest pressure available to an amateur player. He had defended beside Michael Jordan, answered to Bob Knight, and contributed to a team for which anything short of gold would have been judged a failure. That summer did not make him famous in the way it made Jordan famous. It established something quieter and, for Robertson's future, more important. His defense was not a habit that belonged to one college system. It traveled. It survived stronger opponents, harsher scrutiny, and a roster competition crowded with future professionals. The NBA was waiting, and so was one of the deepest draft classes the league had ever seen. In the 1984 draft, the Houston Rockets selected Hakeem Olajuwon first. Portland chose Sam Bowie second. Chicago took Jordan third. The class would eventually produce champions, most valuable players, Hall of Famers, and some of the defining images of modern basketball. With the 7th pick, the San Antonio Spurs selected Alvin Robertson. He arrived as an Olympic champion and a promising defender, but not as the player expected to define the class. The Spurs could imagine his pressure helping them. Almost no one could have predicted that in only his second professional season, he would produce a defensive year the league still has not repeated. Robertson's rookie season introduced the speed and reach. His second season turned them into control. During the 1985-86 campaign, he recorded 301 steals. More than 300 possessions ended with Robertson personally taking the ball away, an average of 3.67 steals per game. Both numbers became the kind of records that look unstable when first achieved, as if another great defender will eventually find the same combination of stamina, opportunity, and instinct. Decades later, the single-season total still stands. The figure matters because it was accumulated across 82 games. 10 steals on one extraordinary night can come from a perfect matchup or a string of careless passes. 301 steals require the defender to remain a threat after every opponent has studied him, warned its guards, and redesigned the safest angles of entry. Robertson did not wait politely in front of his assignment. He pressed close enough to make a comfortable dribble feel temporary. He watched hips, eyes, and the exposed side of the ball. A lazy crossover could vanish below the ball handler's hand. A pass that appeared open could become a sprint in the opposite direction. Even when Robertson failed to touch the ball, the possibility of his reach accelerated decisions. The turnover did not always appear beside his name. The anxiety often did. There is a tension inside that style of defense. Gambling can become selfish. A player can abandon the team concept in pursuit of a statistic that makes his own box score shine. The response to Robertson's season showed that coaches, media members, and opponents believed his aggression was doing more than producing a number. He won Defensive Player of the Year. He also received the first Most Improved Player award in league history, an unusual combination of honors. One recognized the distance he had traveled, and the other declared where he had arrived. Then came February 18th. Against the Phoenix Suns, Robertson scored 20 points. That alone would have made him useful. He collected 11 rebounds, forcing a guard into traffic among larger bodies. He delivered 10 assists, creating enough offense for teammates to reach a third category in double figures. And he made 10 steals. A quadruple-double requires a player to control a game in 4 statistical directions at once. It is difficult not only because each category is demanding, but because the pursuit of one can interfere with another. Scoring asks a player to finish possessions. Assists require him to surrender the shot. Rebounding pulls him toward crowded space. Steals tempt him away from safe defensive position. Robertson reached double figures in all 4 on the same night. The achievement placed him in a club that remains almost impossibly small. Nate Thurmond, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, and Robertson are the only NBA players officially credited with quadruple doubles. The other 3 were centers who reached the 4th category with blocked shots. Robertson is the only guard, the only non-center, and the only player to complete the line with steals. His path to the record did not depend on towering over the paint. It depended on seeing a fraction of a second before everyone else. The obvious question after a night like that was whether it had been a statistical accident, a perfect opponent, a few loose passes, one game in which every gamble happened to work. Robertson spent the rest of his career making that explanation impossible. NBA records credit him with 4 regular season games of 10 or more steals. Only Clyde Drexler has also reached 10 steals more than once. February 18th was not a trick Robertson performed once. It was the most complete version of pressure he could reproduce. The famous box score can still hide the complete player. 20 points meant Robertson could finish possessions. 10 assists meant he could organize them for somebody else. 11 rebounds pulled a guard into traffic among larger bodies. At his offensive peak, he averaged 19.6 points, 6 assists, and nearly 6 rebounds, while continuing to pursue the opponent's primary ball handler. Yet the further he moved from that night, the more his public identity narrowed toward the steals. This is one of the strange consequences of an unmatched achievement. It can preserve a player and flatten him at the same time. The quadruple-double guaranteed Robertson a place in the statistical archive. It did not guarantee that people would remember the rest of the man or even the rest of the player. What kept the performance from becoming mere trivia was repetition. During his San Antonio years, Robertson recorded at least 1 steal in 105 consecutive games. The streak crossed homestands and long road trips, healthy nights and tired ones, careful starting guards and reserves trying to survive a few possessions. Every opponent knew what he wanted. For more than 100 games, none prevented him from taking the ball at least once. The mark stood for more than 2 decades. Chris Paul finally surpassed it from 2007 into 2008, reaching 108 consecutive games. A future most valuable player candidate and one of the most intelligent point guards of his generation had to sustain the same nightly threat to move Robertson into second place. Then there is the number no change of uniform, role, or age managed to pull down. Across 779 career games, Robertson averaged 2.71 steals, still the highest career average in league history. A single-season record can capture a physical peak. A career average has to absorb fatigue, injury, unfamiliar systems, reduced minutes, and the final seasons when instinct survives longer than the body. Robertson's number survived all of them. San Antonio's record book shows how concentrated the damage was. He owns 4 of the franchise's 5 highest single-season averages in steals. In only 5 seasons with the Spurs, he accumulated 1,129 takeaways, enough to remain near the top of a list populated by players who stayed far longer. The warning signs in Robertson's temperament were visible before his name began appearing in court records. Former Spurs center Frank Brickowski later recalled a preseason fight between Robertson and teammate Walter Berry at a team hotel. Teammates separated them, but the confrontation started again and spilled into the hallway. Berry grabbed a butter knife from a housekeeping cart, discarded it when Brickowski pointed out how useless it was, and then picked up a fork. The detail makes the scene sound absurd. The anger behind it was not. Another confrontation came during San Antonio's 21-win season in 1989. Robertson and new coach Larry Brown got into a shouting match and had to be separated. Neither episode was a criminal case, and neither explains everything that followed. They do show that Robertson's volatility was not an identity invented years later by newspaper headlines. It was already creating problems inside the profession that celebrated his defense. By then, another question had begun to replace the first. The talent was real, but did it belong to San Antonio's system or to Robertson himself? The answer would matter because the Spurs were about to separate the player from the city where his reputation had been created. On May 28, 1989, San Antonio traded Robertson, Cadillac Anderson, and a second-round draft pick to the Milwaukee Bucks. In return, the Spurs received Terry Cummings and another second-round pick. Trades encourage simple explanations. A star leaves, trouble follows, and the deal is later treated as if the team had foreseen everything. The return tells a more complicated story. Cummings was an established scorer and former All-Star. San Antonio was exchanging meaningful talent for a different kind of centerpiece, not quietly removing a player the league no longer valued. For Robertson, Milwaukee created a direct test. Had his defensive reputation been amplified by one system, or did the disruption belong to him? The answer came quickly. The uniform changed, the hands did not. Across more than 280 regular season games for the Bucks, Robertson averaged roughly 13 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and nearly 3 steals. His offensive role narrowed, but the balance remained recognizable. Milwaukee did not need to recreate the exact conditions of 1986. Put Robertson near a live dribble or a pass thrown without conviction, and an ordinary possession could still become unstable. In 1991, he earned his 4th All-Star selection and won his 3rd steals title. He averaged 3 steals per game, made the All-Defensive First Team, and finished 3rd in voting for Defensive Player of the Year. 5 seasons after winning the award in San Antonio, he was still receiving votes as one of the best defenders alive. Milwaukee confirmed that Robertson's talent traveled. It also created the most disturbing contrast of his public life to that point. While he remained near the height of his profession, another version of his name began appearing in court records. In 1990, Robertson spent a month in custody on a domestic assault charge involving his then-wife. This happened while he was still an elite defender headed toward another All-Star appearance, not after his career and public visibility had disappeared. Supporters could still describe the first legal headline as a terrible but isolated episode. The years ahead would remove that comfort. For the moment, however, the contradiction remained unresolved. The same season that strengthened Robertson's professional reputation also introduced conduct that would eventually make every later defense of his character more difficult. Basketball, however, had not finished with him. Robertson's career still contained an injury that erased an entire season, a strange transaction that existed only on paper, and a final piece of history at the birth of a new franchise. The game and the legal record were beginning to run beside each other, neither yet able to erase the other. After Milwaukee, Robertson finished the 1992-93 season with the Detroit Pistons. By then, back trouble was limiting the movements his defense depended on: the low stance, the first step into a passing lane, and the sudden recovery after a gamble. During the following season, Detroit traded him to the Denver Nuggets. Robertson never appeared in an official game for Denver. Pre-existing back injuries kept him off the floor, leaving behind one of the emptiest lines on his resume, acquired by a team he never represented. For a player built on reaction, the injury attacked more than speed. Robertson's defense required him to sit low, change direction, reach without losing balance, and recover when the first gamble failed. In his prime, those movements had seemed to occur before conscious thought. Now knowing where to go did not guarantee that his body could take him there. The absence could have ended his NBA story. Instead, an expansion team offered one last opening. When the Toronto Raptors entered the league in 1995, every entry in their record book was blank. Somebody had to score the franchise's first points. In the opening game against the New Jersey Nets, Robertson made a three-pointer and gave Toronto the first basket and first lead in team history. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it carried an unexpected symmetry. Robertson had built his reputation by interrupting possessions. Toronto would remember him for completing its first one. Years after the quadruple-double, after the trade, and after injuries had removed the normal shape of his career, he found one more permanent place in league history. The basket did not restore his prime. Robertson eventually moved into the minor leagues, playing for the Florida Beach Dogs during the 1996-97 stretch. The change in status was impossible to miss. A four-time NBA All-Star was now trying to extend his career outside the league. He kept playing anyway. Basketball remained the one setting in which anticipation and quick hands could still define him more quickly than the legal record forming beside his name. By then, the file could no longer be treated as a single bad night. In June of 1995, an incident occurred at the apartment of Robertson's former girlfriend, Sharon Rayford. Reporting from the case described forced entry, damaged property, and missing personal items. The legal question was not resolved through rumor or a headline. In October of 1996, a jury convicted Robertson of burglary with intent to commit theft. The sentence brought substantial consequences: 10 years of probation, financial penalties, restitution, community service, and 6 months in the Bexar County Jail. Whatever conflict or history surrounded the relationship, the outcome was now a felony conviction entered after a jury proceeding. It belonged to a different category from an untested allegation. A separate case followed. In August of 1997, Robertson pleaded no contest to 4 misdemeanor counts involving another former girlfriend and received a 1-year sentence. A no-contest plea is not a verbal confession, but it allows a court to impose punishment as it would after a conviction. Robertson's legal history is often compressed into a single cloud of accusation. The actual outcomes are clearer and serious enough on their own. A felony burglary conviction arising from the Rayford apartment case, followed by a no-contest plea and another custodial sentence in a separate matter. A reported Toronto assault case from the same period was dropped when the witness did not appear. It produced no conviction. The outcomes already established in the other proceedings were serious enough to change the way the public read Robertson's life. By the late 1990s, Robertson's NBA career was over. The applause had stopped, the sentences were real, and probation extended far beyond the final box score. If the story ended there, it would be familiar: extraordinary athletic ability followed by repeated conduct that damaged other people and consumed much of the life built around the game. The legal consequences continued after the decade ended. In 2001, a positive cocaine test led a judge to order Robertson into residential drug treatment for violating probation. In 2002, after a separate sexual assault accusation, published reports said the woman recanted and the charge was dropped. Robertson nevertheless received a 3-year prison sentence for violating probation and was released in 2003. The sentence was for the probation violation, not the dropped accusation. Robertson still tried to establish a working life outside basketball. He became a general contractor and operated a company, replacing the instant feedback of a steal and a fast break with schedules, materials, employees, and the slower work of earning trust. For a period, the company gave him stability. The later prosecution would place that livelihood under pressure along with everything else. His next attempt returned him to the knowledge he understood best. With Ricky Pierce, he developed the basketball training product, instructional video, and youth clinic plan that took them to Walmart headquarters in February of 2010. Robertson was now back at the restaurant table where this story began. His past made the new case more difficult than a simple story of false accusation. Robertson did not enter 2010 as a beloved athlete with an untouched name. He had already given the public reasons to distrust him. To many observers, the new allegation looked like an escalation of an established pattern. In court, it still had to be proved on its own. What the opening image could not yet show was the imbalance that followed it. The allegations had first been made in 2009. Robertson was arrested in February of 2010 and later indicted on extremely serious charges involving the alleged exploitation of a minor. The headline needed only minutes to reach Walmart and collapse the opportunity. Testing the case would take years. The accusation also changed the meaning of everything that came before it. The youth clinic no longer looked like a former player sharing knowledge. It became impossible to stage with his name attached. The old convictions no longer sat as separate entries in a long record. They became, in the public imagination, evidence of escalation. Even the quadruple-double receded into trivia beside the severity of the new allegation. Robertson denied it. A denial from a defendant is not an answer, and his history made the public less willing to wait for one. If any distinction between proven conduct and this new case was going to survive, it would have to emerge from evidence strong enough to overcome both the charge and the man charged with it. But the process did not move cleanly toward trial. The case traveled through different courts, changes in prosecution, administrative delays, and years of pretrial supervision. There was no dramatic week in which both sides placed their evidence before a jury and received an answer. Instead, uncertainty became the condition of Robertson's daily life. For long stretches, he remained under house arrest, wearing a court-ordered monitor and seeking permission for movements that had once been routine. The physical contrast was unavoidable. The man who had crossed half a basketball court in a few explosive steps now had to ask before he could cross state lines. The restrictions entered his family life. Robertson missed his daughter's wedding in the Bahamas because he could not obtain permission to travel. On the way to a close friend's funeral in Barberton, he realized that he had left the monitor's charger at home. Pretrial officials told him to stop and wait for clearance. 10 hours passed, and he missed the funeral. The central case remained unresolved, while ordinary family moments became impossible to recover. Robertson repeatedly made his own situation worse. He violated pretrial conditions, removed monitoring equipment, and returned to custody more than once. After an apartment fire destroyed a charger, he failed a drug test and spent 8 months behind bars. Judges could punish those violations immediately, even as the central case failed to reach trial. Robertson remained confined, but the original accusation was still unresolved. With every broken condition, he also made himself harder to defend publicly. As the years accumulated, Robertson lost more than freedom of movement. The accusation became a permanent introductory clause. Work disappeared, while enforced absence and suspicion strained ordinary family life. The absence of a verdict did not preserve neutrality. It allowed the most damaging interpretation to remain in circulation. By 2014, 4 years had passed since the arrest. Robertson gave an interview to Bleacher Report writer Sean Powell and tried to draw a line few people seemed interested in drawing for him. "I made some mistakes," Robertson said. "Some of the things I did, I was held accountable for and served my time for them. But some of the things said about me were untrue and shouldn't have been allowed to be a part of my case. And when you're on probation, there are people who can place a call and you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt." Once you're in a negative position, you're automatically going to be judged. You don't have a chance. Robertson was not asking listeners to erase his record. He admitted mistakes and acknowledged punishment, then argued that every new accusation had been allowed to borrow credibility from the last one. In 2014, however, the public still had only his word for that claim. The burglary case had reached a jury. The misdemeanor proceeding had produced a plea and sentence. The new case remained severe enough to define him, but still untested, in open court. Meanwhile, the prosecution struggled to move forward. Later reporting described dates and details that did not hold together. In one example reported after the dismissal, the central accuser initially said that a Robertson associate had sold her to a man at a car lot. After investigators questioned that account, the story changed. The associate had been selling a car, not her. The case then moved through 4 courts, changes inside the district attorney's office, and the appointment of an independent prosecutor. Years passed without a trial. Each delay prolonged Robertson's restrictions and made the state's inability to present its case harder to explain. By late 2015, nearly 6 years had passed since Robertson saw his name appear on the restaurant television. The basketball product was gone. The planned clinic had vanished. Family events had taken place without him. He had spent long periods monitored, confined, or back in custody after his own violations. Still, there had been no trial. On November 30th, Robertson entered a state district courtroom for a final hearing. The event lacked the spectacle of the original accusation. There was no broadcast carrying the resolution, and no corporate meeting waiting to resume. Whatever happened in the courtroom, the years already spent beneath the case could not be returned. The charges were dismissed. All of them. The state never presented the case to a jury, and it never obtained a guilty verdict. The San Antonio Express-News reported that State District Judge Jefferson Moore exonerated Robertson when the charges were dismissed. Other accounts used the narrower language of insufficient evidence. What was clear in public was that the prosecution had deteriorated to the point that it would not continue. Reporting on the dismissal described serious inconsistencies and indications that the central story had been fabricated. Robertson's attorney stated the defense position in the bluntest possible terms. There was no ring. There were no girls. There was one girl who made up the whole story. The quotation came from Robertson's lawyer, not from a judicial finding after a full trial, so it cannot resolve every disputed fact by itself. The public outcome was still significant. The state kept devastating charges in place for almost 6 years, then dismissed everyone after the case's foundation weakened. Robertson's earlier convictions survived the hearing. They could not supply the guilty verdict this prosecution never obtained. When the case ended, Robertson spoke to the San Antonio Express-News. He did not describe the result as a triumphant return or a restoration of justice. He reduced almost 6 years to 4 words. "It ruined me," he said. "I lost everything." The losses were not abstract. The Walmart opportunity had disappeared within hours of the first report. The basketball product and youth clinic were gone. Income, mobility, and access to family had been restricted, while the accusation became the first fact many strangers knew about him. A court could clear charges from a docket. It could not return Robertson to the restaurant before the television changed. Nor did the dismissal place him at the beginning of a clean redemption story. Some of the years in custody grew directly from decisions he made while awaiting trial. The burglary conviction remained, as did the no-contest plea and the record of broken release conditions. What ended in November of 2015 was one prosecution, not the pattern of trouble surrounding much of his adult life. Legal trouble returned to the news in August of 2018. Police responding to a family disturbance reported no new crime at the scene, but they discovered an outstanding warrant alleging a violation of a protective order and arrested Robertson. The incident did not produce a new conviction in the record described here, but it prevented the dismissal of 2015 from becoming a clean ending. This is the history against which basketball institutions have had to consider Robertson's achievements. Those achievements are not marginal. He won Olympic gold, made 4 All-Star teams, claimed 3 steals titles, received the first Most Improved Player award, and became Defensive Player of the Year. He still owns the NBA's 301 steal season and its highest career average in steals per game. He produced the only quadruple-double by a guard and scored the first points in Toronto Raptors history. Yet number 21 is not among the jerseys retired by the San Antonio Spurs. The franchise has offered no official public explanation connecting that absence to one particular event. Robertson played only 5 seasons in San Antonio, and jersey retirement is not governed by a statistical formula. Even so, the unraised number gives the larger argument a visible shape. The record book can measure what Robertson did for the Spurs. The Raptors ask whether the organization wishes to celebrate everything represented by his name. Former Arkansas teammate Darrell Walker argued for a firm boundary. Whatever Alvin has done off the court, Walker said, that has nothing to do with Alvin the basketball player in Arkansas history and what he was as an NBA player. Those are 2 different things. At the level of historical fact, Walker is right. A conviction does not remove a steal from a box score, and a dismissed charge does not create an assist. The defender who reached passing lanes before they appeared was real. So were the nights when opponents organized possessions around keeping the ball away from him. Institutional honor, however, is not the same as statistical accuracy. A retired jersey does more than confirm production. It asks a team and its supporters to celebrate a person through a number. Robertson's number would represent an Olympic champion and record-setting defender. It would also carry the documented harm, repeated legal trouble, and the accusation that dominated his name, even though the state ultimately abandoned it. His family carried the athletic story forward in ways Robertson's own career could no longer do. His son, Tyrell Johnson, was selected in the 2nd round of the 2008 NFL Draft and played defensive back professionally. Another son, Elgin Cook, built a professional basketball career. Elgin's path supplied one of the quietest measures of what the 6-year case had causes. While he was playing college basketball at Oregon, restrictions and instability kept Robertson from seeing him play in person. When the charges were gone and Robertson considered the possibility of finally attending a game, he began to cry. For a man whose life had been defined by arenas, entering one to watch his son should have required no explanation. After years of monitoring, permission requests, and missed family events, it had become a recovered freedom. No medal ceremony, no recognition at center court, only a father walking into the building and taking a seat. The temptation is to let that final image decide everything that came before it. It cannot. Edit the story around the convictions and pleas, and Robertson becomes a fallen star whose talent was overwhelmed by violence and repeated bad decisions. That version is supported by court outcomes, but it quietly encourages the audience to treat every later accusation as one more confirmed offense. Begin at the Walmart meeting and end with the dismissal, and he becomes a wronged man whose past made a collapsing case easy to believe. That version captures what the prosecution cost him, but it asks one failed case to erase conduct for which courts had already held him accountable. Robertson's greatest game can be measured without ambiguity: 20 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists, and 10 steals. His life cannot. Its facts do not settle into balancing columns, and no achievement cancels a conviction, just as no conviction supplies proof missing from another case. The quadruple-double still stands. So do the felony conviction and the no contest plea. Every charge in the later prosecution was dismissed. To acknowledge all 3 is not indecision. It is the only judgment the record supports. Basketball can recognize an extraordinary defender without inventing innocence for the rest of the man. The public can acknowledge documented harm without manufacturing a guilty verdict the state never obtained. Alvin Robertson built his name by taking the basketball away. What remains is a name no single verdict, statistical, legal, or public, can fully possess.